Hey guys, it's Makeshift, and today I'm going to show you how to pattern a faux fur hairpiece just like this. You can see how nice and tall this hair is, and it is sewn directly into my gusset rather than being sewn on top by hand stitching or something like that. And it looks really nice and gives it some interest that you wouldn't be able to get with Minky. So what I've done here is trace my gusset pattern onto a piece of paper. I've only traced half of it on purpose. I just folded my paper hot dog style and traced it exactly centered, just one half onto this piece of paper. And I've also marked where my seam line is and my seam allowance. So what I want to do is edit my gusset pattern to have the faux fur hair on it. Now there's some things to think about. One is how tall you want your hair to be. If you were to just color block out a piece of faux fur, and what that means is just trace your shape of your faux fur onto your pattern and keep it a single piece, then it's going to end up being flat. So if you look at the hair I have here, you can see how mine has volume to it, but if you were to just essentially make a piece of your gusset be faux fur, then this hair would be much flatter than mine is here. It would just sit on top of the head. And that might work for some characters, but for me, I wanted a bit more volume. So what I needed to do was to convert part of my gusset piece into two pieces instead of just one. So this faux fur hair piece is actually two pieces sewn together into the gusset pattern. So to do that, you can just start by drawing your shape onto your hair, and mine was just a general triangle shape. So you can measure this on how long you need it to be. But this is just going to be the seam where your fur lies along here. But now you need to make a seam out here because you're actually going to convert this into two pieces instead of just being one gusset piece. That's, this is a one piece. I only drew half of it, but you cut this as a single piece. But we're going to convert the faux fur to be two pieces. So you can add some width here to give it the height. This is my seam line. I have a very small dart in my gusset, and I want to add some height. So you don't want to add too much, because if you think about how a round pattern piece is, your gusset runs down the center. So if you start expanding that too much, then your head's going to start to get wider and wider. You are going to be constrained overall by the width of your gusset to some extent, because the fabric's going to want to lie along the width of your pattern piece. So while it's going to be stretchy fabric, and fabric can stretch a little bit, if you add it some height, it's not going to make your head become too much wider. And the other thing you want to do is just not stuff up here, because that's also going to encourage it to widen. So if I actually pinch up here, this is not stuffed up here. This is just flat in here. So you can encourage it to keep from widening the head too much as well with how you stuff your piece. So I'm only going to go out, if this is my seam line, then I definitely want to go out beyond here. So maybe just adding that little extra bit is going to give it a little bit more height. And this is also going to depend on how long your faux fur is. So obviously mine is very long, so I don't need to add a whole lot of extra height on this piece to be able to get the Mohawk look. So this is going to be my general shape now. But I want to add some seam allowance because I add seam allowance to my pattern pieces. Since this is going to be 2 pieces, I want to add seam allowance on this side. And I want to make sure that this is going to come to a point here because my gusset does come out like here. So I'm actually sewing this into a point here. So you got to make sure that your faux fur is going to end perfectly at that point. Instead of being too wide here, you want it to be a triangle shape when you end up sewing it together. And so then here, I'm going to add seam allowance to this side because this is where I want my faux fur to start. Okay. So then you would just cut out this piece here. So the final thing I like to do is mark the way that I want the faux fur to run. And you can do some different effects with this, which is pretty neat. So I want my fur to run towards her nose. So I want this to run down. But if you wanted a more like traditional Mohawk look, you could run the faux fur pointing inwards towards each other to get it a very top pointed shape. But you can also just kind of manipulate the fur to get that look as well. And then also I've also run the faux fur back towards the back of their head to get a more slicked hair look. But for this character, I want it running down, so this just helps me remember when I cut out my faux fur which way I want it to run. So now we have to do the same process for the back head piece. So now you need to pattern the back hair on the plush, and this is my pattern piece for the back of the head. So it's just this piece that runs here, and so you just need to do the similar process of marking where you want your faux fur to land and then adding seam allowance. So what I like to do is to use the gusset piece that you've cut out the triangle from that has your faux fur, and use this to line up where your second piece needs to meet. So I know that on my pattern piece, this edge of this pattern lines up with the edge of my gusset here. So I can just lay this on top of my pattern and mark where this piece ends. But this piece has had seam allowance added to it, and I just want to mark where the seam is, so I just need to remove the seam allowance here. So now I know that this line right here is the seam of the faux fur where it's going to meet up with my front gusset piece. So now I can use my first pattern piece and use that to exactly trace the shape at the top so that it's perfectly even. So you want to notice where your seam is and then just line that up with your seam that you just drew. And now you can trace this piece here. And you just want to get the top so that when you sew them together here, it'll be the same width because you added width to your gusset here and it's going to meet the back piece, so they need to be the same width overall. So since this is the seam, then you're going to need to add seam allowance over here, and now you just have to draw the rest of the shape. So I want my piece to be nice and long, come down most of the back of her head, and then just form a nice triangle here. And since I had seam allowance on this pattern piece that I traced here, I don't need to add seam allowance to this side, and I just need to continue this line down to the end. So now I can mark the direction of my faux fur for this piece here, and since I have my front piece facing forward, I also want my back piece to face forward, which means it's going to run in this direction. So this is where it gets helpful to mark the way your pile is running, because this is a minky piece and it needs to run down, but my faux fur piece needs to run up. So now I'm not going to be confused about which way to cut my faux fur. So from here, I would just cut out this piece, and now I'm going to have my 2 pattern pieces, and I need to cut 4 of them total. So I need to trace it like this once on the faux fur, and then flip it over, trace it again, and then do the same thing with this piece here. And when you cut out faux fur, you want to use some sort of a razor. You don't want to use scissors because you don't want to actually cut through the fur itself. You only want to cut through the backing of the faux fur. So once you get your pattern pieces cut out, both your faux fur and your minky, you can go ahead and sew them onto your pieces and then sew your head together. So this was from a test plush, so what I just drew doesn't exactly line up with this, but it'll give you an idea. So you can see here how my forehead piece of faux fur is 2 pattern pieces sewn together at the top here, and then it just meets this single gusset pattern here. So my gusset is only 1 minky piece. It's not split down the middle. It's just a single piece that I sewed the faux fur into, and it lines up perfectly because of the way we patterned it. And then the same with the back piece here, where just sew it to your minky, and then the width is going to line up. Once I have my second piece here, it would line up here with your minky running down here, and then your faux fur running the other way. So then you just treat it like a normal pattern piece that you sew together, just like you would if it was minky, except you have to be careful to make sure that you're treating your seam as the actual fabric here, and you're not trying to sew any of the faux fur here. So hopefully you guys learned something today. I like this technique a lot. I like mixing faux fur with minky for my plushies. I think it makes them look more interesting, and I have a lot of fun doing that personally also. So if you guys use this technique, I'd love to see what you make with it, and I hope you learned something today. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.